They came expecting to feel at home. English on the signs, familiar logos on every corner, the same fast food chains they'd grown up watching in movies. Surely, they thought, nothing here could really surprise them. They were wrong within the first hour. It wasn't the skyscrapers or the highways that caught them off guard. It was smaller than that. A soda cup refilled without being asked. A receipt with a number that didn't match the price on the menu. A stranger's question that felt too casual to be real. One by one, the small things stopped feeling small. And somewhere between the first refill and the first unlocked bathroom door, they realized they hadn't just crossed an ocean. They'd crossed into a country that ran on rules nobody had told them about. Rules that, once understood, were hard to unsee.
As an Englishman that went to live in America, one of the most exciting parts was seeing a yellow school bus for the first time. And anytime I see anyone from abroad post a TikTok saying how excited they are to see a yellow school bus, Americans are always very confused as to why we care. My reply has always been, well, why do you care about the red buses in London? It's the same difference, it's just public transport, but it's exciting because it is a staple of your culture. As much as movies reflect life in America, we all grew up abroad watching American movies and idolizing that kind of lifestyle of getting picked up outside your house and being driven to school every morning, which I know must sound absolutely insane to you guys, but it's exciting to us. So yes, it's exciting. We will be posting TikToks and Instagram stories about it, and you gotta just let us have this one thing.
Why would anyone pay more than the price on the menu without being asked, without being forced, and still call it optional? For most European visitors, the first restaurant bill in America doesn't make sense on paper. The food costs one number. The final charge is another, quietly inflated by 15, 20, sometimes 25%, added not by the restaurant but by the customer themselves, calculated in their head at the table. In most of Europe, a menu price is the price. Service is folded into wages, wages are folded into law, and the transaction ends where the plate does. So when a server in Texas or Ohio waits, not rudely but expectantly, for a tip that was never written anywhere, the instinct is to assume a mistake has been made. Surely this is extra. Surely this is optional. Surely no one will notice if it's skipped. Someone always notices. What visitors slowly discover is that the American tip is not a bonus for good service. It is the wage itself, hidden in plain sight. In much of the country, restaurants are legally allowed to pay servers a base wage far below the standard minimum, on the assumption that tips will make up the difference. The menu price was never the full picture. It was a placeholder, quietly waiting for the customer to complete it. Skip the tip, and a server doesn't just lose a bonus. They lose a meaningful share of what they were counting on to pay rent that month. This isn't explained on any sign. It's absorbed, awkwardly, through experience. Usually after a visibly cold exchange at a counter or a raised eyebrow at a diner. The lesson lands fast, and it never quite leaves. What's harder to explain, and more interesting to sit with, is what the system reveals once the sting of confusion fades. In most of Europe, taking care of a service worker's income is the state's job, or the employer's, folded into a paycheck the customer never sees. In America, that responsibility never fully leaves the room. It sits at the table in the diner's hand every single time. There's no law that can be silently trusted to have handled it elsewhere. The customer is the last link in the chain, and everyone at the table quietly knows it. It would be easy to call this inefficient, even unfair, and many economists do. But for the traveler standing at the register, working out the math for the first time, something else tends to surface alongside the frustration. A strange, involuntary respect for a system that puts a human face on every transaction, even an imperfect one. It's not charity, it's not tradition, it's an entire industry's income, distributed one table at a time by strangers who chose to show up and pay a little more than the number on the page. By the time they leave, most visitors have stopped resenting the habit. They've simply started doing the math before the bill even arrives, because somewhere between the first confused bill and the fifth automatic calculation, tipping stopped being a foreign custom and became, without anyone announcing it, second nature.
How many free refills can you actually get at a restaurant? So I went to Buffalo Wild Wings with the goal of ordering as many drinks as possible in a single sitting to see how many they'd give me before I get cut off, or reached capacity. My drink of choice was my favorite drink, unsweetened iced tea, because it has 0 calories, but I forgot that it does have caffeine, and so I began drinking up my first, second, and third iced tea with absolutely no issue. At the 4th iced tea, I did notice there was visibly more ice in my cup, which I'm guessing was to curb my consumption a bit, but ironically that actually helped me out because now it was easier to get more refills, and so I continued on drinking numbers 5, 6, and 7 before the food ultimately came. Now obviously this much liquid came with many bathroom breaks, but I was pacing decently and eventually got into the double digits. For number 12, I was starting to reach capacity, not only in terms of the total liquid in my body, but also caffeine, having 600 milligrams at this point, so I only had a few more left. I read somewhere that 14 refills by a single person in one sitting was the record, and so I'm happy to state that after 1.5 hours at Buffalo Wild Wings, I achieved 15 refills, setting the apparent record and proving that free refills are actually endless.
What kind of business gives away the thing it could easily charge for again and again without ever mentioning a limit? At almost any diner, fast food counter, or roadside restaurant in America, a soda comes with an invisible asterisk most visitors don't notice until the second time their glass is filled. No one asks if they'd like another. No one adds a line to the bill. A server simply appears, tops off the cup, and walks away, as if the first pour and the fifth were never two separate things to begin with. For someone raised on the standard European model, where a drink is a drink and a second one is a new charge, this looks less like generosity and more like an accounting error waiting to be corrected. Surely, they think, someone is keeping count somewhere. Surely this ends eventually. It doesn't end. That's the part that takes the longest to believe. The explanation, once it surfaces, has almost nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with arithmetic most customers never see. A fountain soda costs a restaurant only a few cents in syrup and carbonation. The real expense was already priced into that first cup. Refilling it costs the business almost nothing, while costing the customer nothing at all. It isn't a gift so much as a rounding error turned into a selling point. What looks like boundless hospitality is underneath one of the oldest tricks in American hospitality economics. Make the customer feel like they got more than they paid for, so they never stop to ask whether they paid enough. But the arithmetic only explains the mechanism. It doesn't explain the feeling that comes with it. The small, specific comfort of not having to ration a drink, of not doing quiet math every time the glass runs low. Visitors who spend enough time in American diners describe a strange shift. The free refill stops being a novelty and starts feeling like a baseline expectation, something a place simply owes its customers for showing up. Go back to paying for a second glass of water in a European cafe, and it can suddenly feel almost stingy, not because it is, but because a new default has quietly taken root. That, more than the free soda itself, is the real discovery. American abundance is rarely announced. It rarely explains itself. It simply gets repeated. A policy at one restaurant, then most restaurants, then an entire category of dining, until visitors stop questioning it and start expecting it. Generosity, done often enough and consistently enough, stops looking like a gesture and starts looking like a personality. By the time they're home, most travelers don't remember the taste of any specific soda. What stays with them is the reflex, reaching for a glass, expecting it to simply be filled again, and feeling for half a second disappointed when it isn't. Why would a cashier who will never see you again ask how your day is going, and mean it just enough to make you answer honestly? The first time it happens, most European visitors assume it's an accident of politeness, quickly forgotten. A cashier at a grocery store, a barista, a stranger passing on a sidewalk. How are you today? Delivered with a warmth that seems too specific to be scripted and too casual to be sincere. In many parts of Europe, this exact phrase, from a total stranger performing a paid service, would read as either flirtation or a mistake. So visitors do what feels safe. They nod, mutter something short, and move on quickly, waiting for the moment to reveal itself as hollow. It happens again at the next register, and the next. That repetition is the first clue that something more deliberate is going on. This isn't spontaneous warmth, it's closer to a shared script taught early and practiced constantly until it stops feeling like a performance and starts functioning like a social reflex. Retail training in America explicitly includes this exchange, not because every employee feels cheerful, but because the ritual itself has value independent of the mood behind it. It smooths a transaction. It signals that the person on the other side of the counter is being treated as a person, however briefly, rather than a function. What looks at first like fake friendliness is, more accurately, a form of etiquette, one with rules just as real as the ones that govern which fork to use first, only aimed at strangers instead of guests. Once visitors understand it as etiquette rather than emotion, something shifts in how they respond to it. They stop searching the cashier's face for sincerity and start recognizing the exchange for what it is: a small, low-stakes ritual that asks nothing of them beyond a few seconds of acknowledgement. Answer honestly or answer on autopilot. Either works. The point was never to extract a real update on your day. The point was to mark, briefly and audibly, that two strangers noticed each other before a transaction, rather than moving through it in silence. What's harder to notice until it's gone is how much friction this quietly removes from ordinary life. Checkout lines move without feeling transactional. Waiting rooms feel less like holding pens. An entire day can pass through dozens of these micro exchanges without a single one demanding anything real. And yet, cumulatively, they leave a texture that silence doesn't. Visitors who return home often describe the opposite discomfort, standing at a counter in near total silence and feeling, for the first time, how loud that absence is. By the end of their trip, most travelers have stopped waiting for the question to reveal itself as fake. They've started answering it the way everyone around them does, quickly, lightly, and without needing it to mean anything more than it was ever meant to. Why would a store take back a dress that's already been worn, no receipt in hand, no explanation offered, and simply hand the money back? For most European visitors, this is the moment the trip briefly stops making sense. They've heard the rumors before arriving that American stores will accept almost anything back, no questions asked, but hearing it and watching it happen are different things. A customer walks up to a counter with a blender still faintly smelling of last week's smoothie, or a dress with a faint crease from being worn once, and simply says it didn't work out. No receipt is demanded, no manager is called, no suspicious pause follows. The money simply returns to the card, and the transaction closes as if it never happened. In much of Europe, where return policies are governed by strict statutory windows and visible skepticism toward the customer's story, this looks less like customer service and more like an oversight someone forgot to fix. It isn't an oversight. It's a bet made deliberately at scale. Large American retailers know, with startling precision, what percentage of returned items are lightly used, mildly abused, or returned for reasons that stretch the truth. They've done the math and decided again and again that the cost of absorbing that dishonesty is smaller than the cost of making every honest customer feel interrogated. It is cheaper, in the long run, to lose money on a small number of bad faith returns than to lose the loyalty of everyone else who simply wants their money back without a cross-examination. The policy isn't generosity in the emotional sense, it's a calculated wager that trust, extended broadly and without friction, pays for itself in repeat business. What makes this harder to fully absorb, even after the mechanics are explained, is how differently it treats the customer as a default. Many European consumer protection systems start from a posture of caution, proving something is defective, keeping documentation, expecting a negotiation. The American version starts from the opposite assumption, that most people telling you something didn't work out are telling the truth, and the few who aren't are simply the cost of doing business this way. It's a system built on statistics rather than suspicion, on the aggregate rather than the individual, and it only works because enough people, most of the time, don't take advantage of it. There's a quiet vulnerability underneath that convenience, one visitors don't always name out loud. A system this trusting can only exist where enough people choose not to exploit it, where the absence of a question is filled, invisibly, by a kind of unspoken agreement most customers never consciously make, but somehow keep. By the time they leave, most travelers have stopped bracing for the question that never comes. They walk up to a counter, say the item didn't work out, and wait for money to appear back on their card. No longer surprised that it does, only quietly aware, for the first time, of how much invisible trust that moment actually costs. Why would a restaurant hand a customer more food than one person could reasonably finish, and then act surprised if they didn't take the rest home? The moment often arrives with a plate that seems built for 2 people, set down in front of one. A visitor from Lisbon or Lyon looks at a stack of pancakes wider than the table setting, or a portion of pasta that could feed a small family back home, and assumes reasonably that a mistake has occurred. Perhaps the order was doubled by accident. Perhaps this table was meant for someone else. But the server moves on without concern. The kitchen keeps sending out identical portions to every other table, and it slowly becomes clear that nothing has gone wrong. This is simply what a plate looks like here. The portion wasn't an exception made for a special occasion or a premium price. It was the standard, delivered without ceremony, as if abundance itself were the default setting of the entire country's kitchens. What follows is often a small, private moment of failure. Most visitors try, at least the first time, to finish what's in front of them. Some instinct toward politeness, or the old European habit of leaving a clean plate as a sign of respect to the cook. It rarely works. The pancakes win, the pasta wins, and what's left afterward isn't a modest amount of leftovers, but nearly half a meal, sitting untouched, waiting for a decision nobody back home ever had to make quite this often. What happens to all this food now? The answer arrives before the question is even finished forming. A server appears, unprompted, holding a container, asking the same question they ask a dozen times a shift. Would you like a box for that? No embarrassment colors the offer. No judgment follows the answer either way. In much of Europe, asking for a box to carry home unfinished restaurant food can still read as slightly awkward, a small admission that either the portion was too large or the diner too full to appreciate it properly, something quietly best avoided in front of company. In America, the box appears as automatically as the check, treated not as a concession, but as a basic feature of the meal itself, as ordinary as a napkin or a glass of water. The explanation, once visitors dig into it, has less to do with generosity and more to do with a different relationship to scarcity altogether. American portion sizes grew decade by decade alongside a food economy built on abundance rather than restraint, cheap grain, cheap meat, cheap calories relative to income, and a culture of hospitality that measures generosity partly in volume. To serve a small, precisely calibrated portion can read, in an American context, as slightly withholding, even stingy, regardless of how well balanced or well prepared the meal actually is. Bigger has long been the easiest way to signal that a guest is being taken care of, that they are getting their money's worth, that nobody at this table will leave hungry. It is a language of care expressed in ounces and inches rather than in words. What makes this fact linger longer than the plate itself is the way it quietly rewires a visitor's instincts about waste and enough. At home, ordering more than could reasonably be eaten might carry a small tinge of irresponsibility, a failure to gauge appetite correctly, a minor waste of money and food alike. In America, the same behavior reads as the system working exactly as intended. Order what looks appealing, eat until satisfied, and let the extra travel home in a box rather than into the trash. The doggy bag, far from being an embarrassment, becomes something closer to a small victory. Dinner tonight and lunch tomorrow, for the price of one meal, no apology required. By the end of the trip, something in most visitors has shifted without them fully noticing when it happened. They no longer flinch at a plate that looks built for 2. They ask for the box before the server even offers it, tuck it into a bag without a second thought, and walk out having quietly adopted, meal by meal, a definition of enough that would have seemed almost reckless a few weeks earlier, and strangely difficult to unlearn once they're home, staring down a portion half the size, wondering where the rest of it went. Why would a gas station off an empty highway, miles from the nearest town, leave its bathroom unlocked, unattended, and free for anyone who needs it, whether they buy anything or not? It's usually the smallest crisis of the trip that reveals it. Somewhere along a long American highway, a visitor pulls into a gas station, not to fill the tank, but simply to find a bathroom, bracing for the routine they know from home, a coin slot, a code printed on a receipt, a locked door requiring a key from behind the counter. Instead, the door is just open. No one asks what was purchased. No one asks anything at all. A cashier might glance up, might not, and either way, the door swings in the same as if the customer already belonged there. In much of Europe, where paid public toilets are common enough to budget for and locked ones common enough to expect, this is the moment the trip briefly stops making sense in a new, smaller way. Not confusion this time, but something closer to relief that arrives before the mind has finished questioning it. The explanation is less about hospitality than about a different assumption baked into how American businesses treat the people passing through them. A gas station off a rural highway isn't really selling gasoline as much as it's selling a reason to stop. And a clean, accessible bathroom is often the deciding factor in which exit a driver chooses over the next one. The bathroom isn't a courtesy extended after a purchase. It's part of the pitch that gets the purchase to happen at all. Multiply that logic across a country built around long-distance driving, where towns can sit 40 miles apart, and a bathroom might be the only reason to stop between them. And what looks like generosity turns out to be infrastructure. Quiet, unglamorous, and essential. What makes this fact different from the others isn't the mechanism behind it, but how invisible its absence becomes once it's expected. Nobody plans a road trip around bathroom access the way they might plan one around fuel stops or hotel bookings, because in America, they don't have to. The confidence that a bathroom will simply be there, unlocked whenever it's needed, isn't something visitors notice until they're standing in front of one, door already open, wondering what they were bracing for in the first place. And that, more than any of the facts before it, tends to be the one that stays. Not the ice, not the refills, not the portion sizes or the tipping math, but the quiet, physical relief of never once, across thousands of miles, having to calculate whether relief itself would cost something or come with a locked door. It's a strange thing to end a trip remembering, but ask most visitors months later what surprised them most about America, and somewhere after the landmarks and the skylines, a gas station bathroom, ordinary and unlocked, has a way of quietly making the list. A small, unglamorous kindness, a country built into itself so thoroughly that most of the people living there have never once had to think about it at all. None of these moments made it into any postcard, any travel brochure, any list of must-see landmarks. No one plans a trip around a refillable soda or an unlocked bathroom door. And yet, months after the skylines have faded and the landmarks have blurred together into a single generic memory of America, it's these small, almost embarrassing details that visitors find themselves describing first. The tip they didn't understand until they did, the plate that came home in a box, the door that simply opened when they needed it to. What ties them together isn't hospitality in the way anyone usually means the word. It's something closer to a set of quiet agreements a country makes with the people passing through it. That a stranger's day is worth asking about. That a mistake is worth trusting before it's questioned. That comfort shouldn't have to be earned twice. None of it was announced. None of it came with an explanation taped to the wall. It simply repeated business after business, town after town, until an entire way of treating people started to look less like customer service and more like a personality a whole country had grown into, almost without noticing. Maybe that's the part worth sitting with longer than the rest. Not whether tipping makes economic sense, or whether portion sizes should really be this large, but what it says about a place that so many of its smallest, least advertised habits turn out to be the ones visitors can't quite leave behind. The landmarks were expected, the soda refill wasn't. And perhaps that's the more honest measure of what a country is actually like. Not the things it puts on postcards, but the things it simply does, without asking anyone to notice. So the question worth asking long after the trip is over isn't what Europe got wrong about America before arriving. It's this: how many of a country's truest qualities are hiding right now in the details too small for anyone to have thought to mention?